Now what this is it's a data set, as you can see, of states. And the states have election data. It's got some voting data in it. It's got the raw vote and also the electoral vote. The column I was most interested in mapping tonight was the difference between the Democratic percentage and the Republican percentage. So let's look at states that are sort of evenly split or almost evenly split, and also states that are a bit lopsided one way or the other. So I started with a spreadsheet. And then what you do is you click on the add-in, which is actually out here as an Esri Maps tab. And I'm going to show you that here right now. So right here, see this Esri Maps tab at the top? That's what I'm looking at here at the moment. Then we're going to add a map. So on the Esri Maps tab, there's a couple of tools, one of which is Insert Map on the far left over here, Insert Map. And so I've inserted a map, and I don't have any data in it yet because that's the next step. Now you've got to indicate your data source. You've got a table or a named range, or you've got a cell range. I usually use the cell range so that I can just band a box like you normally would in Excel, and you get the range of data like I'm doing right here. So I just basically, and actually I think it was Catherine or Amy Work that showed me this at our institute this summer, Control-Shift right arrow, Control-Shift down arrow, and I now easily captured with just a couple of keystrokes my whole data set. That's very nice to know about. And so then, as you can see on the right-hand side, it says, oh, okay, you're adding some data. How is location represented in your data? In my case, with this spreadsheet, it is a state, right? So I select the U.S. state. Now, one note here, that let's say you've got data that is not addresses or latitude, longitudes, or states, cities, counties, etc., or countries. What do you do then? Well, one of the things that at least the 2013 folks were able to do in our sessions in the Learning Center this summer is we mapped some data that Lynn Malone had for Lyme disease by Rhode Island town. And in the case of Rhode Island, being an interesting state that it is, the town boundaries are actually polygons, and they are sort of like sub-counties. And so we got a map that we put up on ArcGIS Online for the county, actually town boundaries for Rhode Island. And the reason and the way that we got those mapped, even though it wasn't in this list, but see at the bottom this plus sign where it says Add Custom Location Type? That's what we did when we mapped the Rhode Island data, and I'll show you that if we have time in a moment. So right now I'm picking from this standard list, and I've got U.S. states. Then, of course, as you probably would expect, it asks, okay, which columns contain the location? And in my case, I'm picking the zip code. I also have a column that has the state name. But as you know from being in GIS circles for a while, it's always best to map on the code if you've got it. And then I also indicated that the first row in my data set actually contains the headers, right? It's the field names themselves. Then it generates a map. Okay, great. Well, now I need to put some data in that map, and that's the next step. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are some different terms. Shouldn't be too hard to navigate. Just takes a little bit of getting used to. But remember, this is for really the non-GIS expert. And so in this case, it's called, instead of symbolization, it's called style, and then instead of classification, it's called grouping. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the PC difference, the percentage difference between the Democratic percentage and the Republican percentage by vote by state. And as you can see here, I'm mapping on quantile. And what I've got is, when I'm done, is the symbolization. I'm going to dive over to my spreadsheet now and show you this live. So here's my spreadsheet. And by the way, this is a little bit interesting, but even though you don't get the double arrow on the edge of these spreadsheets, these maps inside of your spreadsheets, it can actually make it bigger. So you can pull these things out, even though there's just a plus sign. See what I'm doing there? I'm making it a little bit bigger. Okay, so this kind of floats on top of your spreadsheet. Great. Now, in this particular one, see, I went to grouping, and I'm actually mapping on quantile, and I've got 3 categories, and I wanted to make the color ramp sort of a familiar one that we're all sort of used to on electoral maps these days, with the blues being In this case, remember we're mapping differences in voting, so the blue are more heavily, in terms of the 2012 vote, Democratic, the red being more heavily Republican. Interesting looking at the data, because if you can, hopefully you'll be able to see this. These are live web maps now. It's actually living live, which I'll show in a moment. And the difference here in Oklahoma was 33, because basically 33% of people voted Democratic, 66% voted Republican. So that's one of the more lopsided states red-wise, Utah being 48%. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got California with 21% difference between 55% Democrat and 38% voting Republican in the last major election. Now let's pan up to Alaska for a moment. You notice that Alaska is a hatch pattern, and if you can look on the right-hand side here, here is my legend for this particular field. This is a bug, and it's being worked on, but we kind of uncovered this while we were actually mapping this particular data set. If a number of what you're mapping is actually on the boundaries of these categories, then it doesn't group it for some reason, but it'll be fixed. But the nice thing is that, see, this is a live web map, and let's talk about how I made it live here as we go back to where we left off here. Okay, so done with the symbolization, and now what? I wanted to just briefly, ever so briefly, mention something that came up this past summer in our T3G Institute, and that is something called data enrichment. Now, it's a bit of an odd term, but think of it as adding wonderful, wonderful data to your existing data. And so this is what's a beauty about the cloud-based platform that we have nowadays, right, folks? So what it does is it looks at, oh, you've got some data. You've got some U.S. data in this case. Hey, cloud-based GIS, ArcGIS that I am, I've got access to all kinds of other data that you might want to look at. And so you can actually decide to say, oh, you know, I want to look at some of these other variables. It might not be in your original Excel spreadsheet, but kind of wrap your head around this one. It took me a while to wrap my head around the beauty that is in here, which is basically tapping into the data that's sitting out there on the cloud, and actually you could physically add it to your spreadsheet and then map that as well. So short example, looking at population pyramids, which I dearly love, and I know many of you love this stuff too. So we're looking at a couple of counties in Idaho, and you can see the differences between two different counties in Idaho that I decided to say, hey, I want to add some demographic data to my voting data because I want to look at maybe younger states are voting one way or another. You know, I don't know. I want to look at some additional variables to find out. So that's data enrichment. And that leads to another point that I had of note to self to mention to you all, and that is geocoding, data enrichment, and some other things. Just keep in mind that they consume credits. You're out there in your organizational subscription, and these things do consume credits. So it's just something to keep in mind. You don't want to add every single data enrichment thing possible, just like you don't want to geocode every single Starbucks, right, in the world. So, you know, it's just another thing to keep in mind. Then, how did I get that map out on ArcGIS Online? Well, the nice thing is that inside the Esri Maps for Office, you've got this button on the Esri Maps add-in inside Excel that says, hey, share map, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And as you might expect, it's going to ask for a little bit of metadata, and who are you going to share it with? Your organization, some groups inside there, or everyone. So once I said, oh, I want to share that with everyone, now you can access it right after this. Well, you can do it right now if you want to multitask, but map is now on ArcGIS Online, and here it is. I called it 2012 voting, and I gave it a little bit of metadata. Need to populate some more of it, but this is basically what it looks like. And of course, now that it's on ArcGIS Online, I can do the standard stuff of you know, selecting different features inside there, and you can see that all of the fields in my original spreadsheet are now inside that data set that's sitting out on ArcGIS Online. It's a beautiful world. It really is.